Week 3 of the fantasy football season. He has the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. We know Joe Burrow out 3 months with the turf toe. Last week is still a monster game. It was for Jamar Chase, even after Burrow went out with Jake Browning in there, quarterback. 14 catches, 165 yards, and a touchdown. So no doubt about it, this week a tough matchup versus a pretty stout Minnesota Vikings secondary. But Jamar Chase, until he really struggles with Browning, I'm going to keep him in that number 1 spot. Number 2, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua, first 2 weeks of the season, he's been one of the best receivers out of the gate in fantasy football. Great possession receiver, yard after catch guy. We saw him rush a 45-yard touchdown on an end around last week. And this week at Philly, obviously a tougher matchup where they got a solid secondary, but Puka Nacua, he's a matchup-proof receiver. Number 3, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So Lamb, he's off to a good start in the early going. Just drops have been an issue. He dropped 3-4 passes in week 1 at Philly, and then last week he dropped 1 or 2 passes as well with CeeDee Lamb, but 2 games in a row over 100 yards. This week a great matchup at the Bears that just got torched by the Lions, giving 115 yards and 3 TDs up to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and also we saw Jameson Williams go for 108 and 2 TDs. So what a great matchup this week in a potential high-scoring game at Soldier Field. I like Lamb once again to have a big one. Number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So like I mentioned, monster game last week, over 35 fantasy points for St. Brown. Monday Night Football, this could be a high-scoring game, even though it's a tougher matchup at a defense like the Baltimore Ravens. But St. Brown, he's matchup-proof as well. He could run all the routes, and him and Jared Goff, when they're locked in, it's one of the better quarterback to receiver combos in the league. Number 5, Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. Nabers exploded with a monster game and a great game at Dallas, even though it was a bad loss. 9 catches, 167 receiving yards and 2 TDs. So he could pop off anytime, obviously, as Malik Nabers. He's a generational talent at the wide receiver position. And we saw last season some big games with no quarterback play. And now with him and Russ can hit on those deep balls, especially this week versus Kansas City, where they got to put points on the board and most likely chasing points. Nabers, every week, he's going to be a top 5 option. Number 6, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So in my opinion, I think Carson Wentz is a better fit with Justin Jefferson. I know Wentz is going to turn the football over. I know he's going to take risks and big hits, but he's a gunslinger as well, and we've seen Wentz get that football down the field and get the ball to his playmakers. So this week, a pretty good matchup versus Cincinnati Bengals. Their secondary isn't much over there, and Jefferson, he's due for a big game. After the first 2 weeks, it's been quiet for the most part. Number 7, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Collins, he's off to a slow start. Had a nice back of the end zone catch in week 2's loss versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but him and Stroud are just missing on even bigger plays. They missed on a couple in week 2 versus the Bucs, but Nico Collins, he's pretty much the only option over there. Xavier Hutchinson, Jaden Higgins haven't done anything so far in the early going, and Christian Kirk still banged up with the hamstring injury. So this week in a matchup with a Jacksonville secondary that can't stop anyone, I like Nico to have a good game this week. Number 8, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So JSN, last season a big year was for him, over 100 catches, and him and Sam Darnold are locked in here, where obviously it's the first season for Sam Darnold in Seattle. So JSN, he could run all the routes. He could burn a secondary, no doubt about it. And this week, a good matchup with the Saints coming to town, where their secondary has given up a lot of points in the early going to wide receivers. Number 9, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So Zay Flowers, he's the number 1 option over there in the passing game, where Mark Andrews once again taking a back step, it looks like this season. Andrews, he's done nothing and non-existent in the box score. I know Hopkins, he's got a couple touchdowns in the early going, but Zay Flowers, week 1, he went off with the biggest game of his career, over 140 yards, found the end zone. And this week, a potential high-scoring game with the Lions coming to town on Monday Night Football. I think Flowers once again goes out there and gives a top 10 performance. Number 10, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So last week, it was a tough matchup at Minnesota. London, he didn't do anything of note. It was a dud ball game for him, no doubt about it. But this week, a great matchup at the Panthers, where they can't stop anyone. And even with a bum shoulder and not 100% for Drake London, I think he could go out there, bounce back, and we've seen it so far this season. Carolina can't stop anyone. Number 11, Davante Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. Adams last week at his coming out party with his new team in the Rams. 6 catches, 106 yards, and a touchdown. And Davante Adams, even up there at age now a little bit, still can run the routes. He can make the plays. Good yard after catch guy. And with single coverage, with obviously teams focusing on Puka Nacua very early and often and double teaming him with safety over the top at time. Adams is going to have his way most weeks than not. Number 12, Theodore McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. I was big on McMillan coming into the season, and so far he hasn't disappointed. Week 1, 5 catches, 68 yards in that ball game versus the Jaguars. And then last week at Arizona, 6 catches, 100 yards. So McMillan, a big target, best receiver coming out easily this season in the NFL draft. And this week in a matchup versus Atlanta, where once again, in most of the season, they're going to be chasing points early and often, is Carolina. McMillan, pretty much the only steady option over there in the passing game. I know Hunter Renfrow had a big game, but Chuba Hubbard and McMillan, the only 2 big options, I think, for this Panther offense. Number 13, Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. Odunze, 2 games, 3 touchdowns already. Last week, a monster game at Detroit, 7 catches, 128 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And we just saw what Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson did. Both those receivers going over 140 yards in last week's game versus bad Cowboys secondary. So I think Odunze, maybe I'm a little higher on him this week than others. But with 2 good games to start the year and a great matchup versus a bad defense, I think Odunze could put up big numbers again. 14, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Last week he went over 100 yards, which was good to see with Hill. And also finally had a catch over 30 yards where he had a 48-yard reception as well. So this week in Buffalo, Thursday night, usually high-scoring games. Miami most likely going to be chasing points. And Hill, he's just going to work his way into production, I think, in this game, where they're going to have to force-feed him because pretty much it's him and A-Chan, the 2 top options in this offense. I know Waddle had a touchdown last week, but he hasn't been doing much over the last couple of years. 15, Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders. I think Deebo Samuel's the number 1 option now in this passing game for Washington. Terry McLaurin holding out all training camp and getting the contract at least at the end of it. It's taking a hit on him, obviously, is Terry McLaurin, where Deebo was working as the number 1 wide receiver, building rapport in training camp with Jaden Daniels, even though we'll see if Daniels plays in this game. Right now, he's questionable with that ankle sprain, but Deebo, he can run the routes. They might use him more in the backfield now as well with Austin Eckler out for the year with a torn Achilles. And this week, a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders that can't stop anyone. 16, Lab McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So far, Lab McConkey's off to a little bit of a slow start in the early going. Is Lab McConkey. He hasn't found the end zone where Keenan Allen's got 2 touchdowns and Quentin Johnston has 3 touchdowns in the early going. But underneath, great route runner, good hands is Lab McConkey, and Herbert just missed him on a crossing route in that Monday night game where he would have had a monster game. So this week versus Denver, I don't think Surtain's going to be on McConkey a lot. We know Lad, he lines up in the slot, and he might get Keenan Allen or Quentin Johnston is Surtain. And like I said, McConkey, just one of the better possession receivers in the league. 17, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So far, a couple tough matchups for Evans out of the gate. Week 1 versus improved secondary of the Falcons, he didn't have a great game. And then last week, Derek Stingley, one of the better corners in the league, was playing bump and run and man coverage up in the face of Mike Evans all game. And he still had some big plays towards the end. So this week, he might get Sauce Gardner half this game on him. But he's got the size advantage, strength is Mike Evans. And we know he's due for a big game as Mike Evans. Him and Baker Mayfield, since Baker's been a buck since 2023. They've connected and put up numbers. So this week, with the Jets coming to town and Tampa's home opener, I think Evans goes out there, has a nice performance. 18, Garrett Wilson of the mentioned New York Jets. Garrett Wilson, week 1 had a big game. Last week, a pedestrian game and a tough matchup. 4 catches, 50 yards versus the Bills. And this week at Tampa, their only chance is to get that football down the field and put points on the board if the Jets want to win this one. So Garrett Wilson, we've seen him put up numbers with bad quarterbacks his whole career. Justin Fields, it's not looking good right now that he's going to play in this game in concussion protocol. And this week at Tampa, if it's Tyrod Taylor going to start, going to force feed Garrett early and often. Number 19, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. A.J. Brown, his stock's falling off quickly in the first 2 weeks of the season, where week 1 he couldn't get any separation versus the Dallas Cowboys. He only had 1 catch for 8 yards, and then week 2 only 5 catches, 27 yards. So this Eagle offense, pretty much right now, they're winning games through Saquon Barkley's running ability and Jalen Hurts running the football. So A.J. Brown, if he can't get it done this week, or at least a good improvement, like let's say even 5 catches, 60 yards in this game, he's someone that's going to just keep dropping down the rankings. And this week it's a tough matchup versus the Rams. They got a good defense. We saw week 1 they shut down Nico Collins, 3 catches, 25 yards. And last week Ridley didn't do much. Number 20, George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. Pickens in a contract season. Week 1, he didn't do anything. 3 catches, 30 yards. But last week, he made some big plays on a couple third downs and a nice touchdown in the fourth quarter. So him and Dak are getting the report down. Pickens obviously getting a lot of one-on-one coverage. He's a deep ball threat with defenses roaming a lot of coverage towards CeeDee Lamb. And this week at Chicago, at Soldier Field, it should be a high-scoring game. And I think Pickens could go out there and put up some numbers. 21, Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the rookie off to a good start for this Buccaneer team. And him and Baker have good rapport in the first 2 games of the year. 3 touchdowns for Egbuka. On Monday night, it wasn't a great game for Egbuka, where the touchdown obviously saved his day. But this week at the Jets, I think he could go out there. He could have a good ball game. He's getting single coverage with obviously a lot of attention on Mike Evans and possibly Sauce Gardner going to be shadowing Evans the whole game. And Emeka Egbuka, one of the more impressive rookies out of the gate. 22, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So BTJ, he's falling down the rankings quickly, where he was a back-end first rounder, early second rounder. And Trevor Lawrence, he's getting the football out and making plays. But it just hasn't been to Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter. So he did have 12 targets in the last game in the tough loss at Cincinnati, which is obviously a great sign. But he only caught 4 of them for 44 yards, I believe, in that game. So Thomas Jr., maybe he's scared of contact in the middle of the field. He was shying away. He dropped the ball as well, where he was looking to run without it. So this week versus Houston, let's see if he could get things going. 23, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this week, I don't like the matchup that much for DK Metcalf. Week 1, he had 4 catches, 83 yards. And then last week, a pedestrian game. If he didn't have that jump ball touchdown, it was a nothing ball game for Metcalf. Aaron Rodgers, week 1, he had the 4 touchdowns. Last week, he didn't do much. Is Rodgers, and this week, not that great of a matchup. DK Metcalf is a back-end 2 receiver to me this week. 24, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. So Marvin Harrison, we saw it all rookie season with him. One big game, then a bad game, then a mediocre game, then a big game again, then a couple games you don't do much. So inconsistencies have been a problem, unfortunately, for Marvin Harrison, where he was a stud wide receiver, obviously, in college. And this week in a matchup at San Francisco, I think they're going to try to take him out in this one. We know Trey McBride's going to get his. He's the number 1 target in the passing game. But Harrison still, to me, number 2 wide out for fantasy owners. 25, Jacoby Myers of the Vegas Raiders. So he's the number 2 option in the passing game behind Brock Bowers. Last week, made some good plays with Jacoby Myers. But Geno Smith, he was totally off, missing targets, overthrown balls, turning the football over. But this week at Washington, I think Jacoby Myers, he could go out there and be a fringe number 2 wideout, but definitely someone to have in your starting lineup as a flex or a number 3 receiver. 26, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So T. Higgins last week found the end zone, but now with Joe Burrow out, obviously this whole offense is going to take a hit over there in Cincinnati, unfortunately. But Jake Browning, he's not a scrub backup quarterback. He's actually a guy that could work the field, get the football down the field. He went 4-3 a couple seasons ago when Burrow was out. And even Jamar Chase had some big games when he was out as well a couple years ago. So Higgins in Minnesota, tough matchup to begin with. And now with obviously a downgraded quarterback, he's the number 3 wide receiver flex, 27, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So DJ Moore so far off to a slow start this season once again. Last year, him and Caleb for the most part were off, but DJ Moore, he got a lot of bubble screens and short route type of work, where he still had 98 catches last season, but so far this year in PPR weeks, he's failed to reach double digits the first 2 weeks. But this week, a good matchup that could get him in this offense on track versus the Dallas Cowboys that can't stop anybody. And Moore this week as well, he's a back-end option. 28, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. Pearsall, so far, he's looked good, operating as a starting wide receiver, him and Jawan Jennings over there for this 49er team. And now with Mac Jones in there, quarterback, we'll see if they can continue to get things going. Last week was a layup matchup versus New Orleans, a bad defense where Mac Jones had 3 touchdowns. But this week, a little bit of a tougher matchup, division rival Arizona Cardinals coming in. But Ricky Pearsall, he's been solid so far, and he was a first-round pick for a reason last year in the NFL Draft. 29, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Worthy, it looks like he's going to come back. He almost tried to play through the shoulder injury in week 2. And Worthy, we know he's a good deep ball threat. We know they're going to use him on a lot of screens and bubbles and outs, is Xavier Worthy, to try to get him in space for yard after catch. And this offense definitely could use the boost. Mahomes is definitely playing better this year than he is the last. And we saw Tyquan Thornton catch a deep ball for a touchdown last week, where that's an Xavier Worthy type of play in the playbook. So this week in a matchup at the Giants that can't stop anyone, I think it's a good matchup for Worthy to come back in and get his legs under him again. 30, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So last week, bad game for Sutton. He didn't show up. Indianapolis shut him down, where Troy Franklin had a breakout game for this Denver team. 8 catches, 89 yards, and found the end zone. And this week, another tough matchup at the Chargers. I know Khalil Mack, he's going to be out a while with the elbow forearm injury for this Charger team. But Derwin James in the secondary, he creates havoc. I think they're going to get pressure on Bo Nix, where it's going to be tough for him as well in this game. So Cortland Sutton, again, this week, I don't think the ceiling is that high, but as the schedule gets easier, I think he'll get back to form. 31, Jawan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. Last week found the end zone. I didn't think he was going to play, honestly, with the shoulder injury, but he gutted it out, and him and Mac Jones were connecting and making plays. So Mac Jones, he's driving the football down the field. He looked good, I know, was the New Orleans Saints. And this week, Arizona, they're middle of the pack defense. I think Jennings and Ricky Pearson, both these wide receivers, could be okay options. 32, Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. So Keon Coleman had a breakout game in week 1 versus the Baltimore Ravens. He found the touchdown, went over 100 yards. And then last week, that game with the Jets was over pretty early, where James Cook took over and had a massive ball game. So this week versus Miami, it could be more of the same, where James Cook runs wild. They don't have to throw a whole lot. But Keon Coleman, he's their best receiver, I think, over there. Khalil Shakir is more of a slot number 3 receiver for a team. And Joshua Palmer, he's more of a backup 3-4 wide receiver. So I think Coleman this week versus Miami bounces back. 33, Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Keenan Allen, since he came back home to the Chargers in training camp, so far off to a great start. 2 weeks in a row, over 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues. 2 weeks in a row finding in the end zone. Him and Herbert have the ESP. And obviously, they got great rapport playing together for many seasons before Allen got traded off for 1 year. So this week, it's a matchup versus Denver. Their secondary solid, obviously led by Patrick Surtain, where I think at times he's going to guard Keenan Allen. But Allen, so far, as long as he's healthy, he's still one of the better and underrated possession receivers in the league. 34, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So J-Mo, we know he's a deep ball and nothing type of player. And last week, he exploded. 2 catches, 108 yards, 2 touchdowns. So this week at Baltimore, this could be shootout up and down the field between these two teams. We saw in week 1, Baltimore and the Bills, 41-40, a tough loss for them. So J-Mo, like I said, it takes one deep ball to make his day. In some weeks, obviously, he's not going to get it, but more weeks than not, over the last season, he has. 35, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. I know Olave's getting peppered with targets, where they're going to be trailing pretty much every game this season and have to play catch-up and throw the football 35, 40 times a game. Is Spencer Rattler in this same team. But Chris Olave, I just think, is a ceiling cap in this receiving room here in New Orleans, where 15, 16 fantasy points at most these wide receivers are going to get. So this week, not a great matchup. Obviously, it's Seattle. Tyrone Woolens, most likely going to cover Chris Olave, one of the better corners, in my opinion, in pro football. And the Seattle Seahawks defense last week, we saw the receivers over there in Pittsburgh not do much, especially if Metcalf didn't get the touchdown. And the 36th and final receiver I'm rankings, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. I'm way down on Terry McLaurin. Like I said, no training camp, holding out for the contract. Rightfully so, get your money. Obviously, no doubt about it, but it definitely is taking a hit on players over the last couple of years at the receiver position that held out. We saw it with CeeDee Lamb, got off to a slow start last year, and we saw it with Brandon Ayuk, where he didn't do anything the first few weeks of the year, and then he tore the ACL. So Terry McLaurin going through some of the same, and also Deebo Samuels looked like the better wide receiver and operating as the number 1 receiver, taking those reps in training camp. So McLaurin hopefully gets his legs on the rim and get things going. But like I said, he's a 3 fringe option this week. So that's the top 36 receivers I'm ranking for week 3 of the fantasy football season.